All right, welcome aboard everyone. Welcome to this new episode, and this one's all about healing, and that's what I've done. The black eye's just about gone, got a little bit left, but she swelled right up, it's completely shut. The head's still quite sore actually. It was a good clock on the old scone, and ironically enough Mick contracted COVID. He's been out for a couple of weeks. Well, that's what he's telling me anyway.
Yep, it's been a bit rough, that's for sure, Pops.
Yep, so we've had a couple of weeks of up and down, but we're getting back to it. These things happen unfortunately, but here I am back on the front. I've got this front bar back on, and man was that a mission. When I put it on, the bar brackets were all over the shop. They'd been bent into a bad way because that bar obviously didn't fit the way it was supposed to. So now we reconfigured the whole front, got it back to how it should be. Everything that was on there that had been butchered into shape, I had to go back to square one, fix it all. So when I put the actual bar on, the bar ends sat out like it was flying off the car. Honestly, between the bar end and the edge of the guard there, I would have had at least that much distance either side, and I've had to bring it into literally that much, which I've done. But that bar was so stretched because when I got into it and had a look, the way it had all been hammered out from the back of it there, it must have had a good hit right in the nose and punched the bar back in and spread the bar, so it's actually stretched the bar right out. So however it was done, I don't know. It was all obviously butchered and pushed back into shape to get it back on the car. And where they'd hammered all that bar to try and make it back into its shape, it actually stretched it and made it even worse. So when I got it on, got to have a look, straighten the brackets, realising then that nothing's going to fit. The bar was absolute mission impossible to get it on. And I even looked at doing a couple of heat shrinks in it. We tried that, didn't really work to the degree that I would have liked it. So what I had to do was I had to open the bar up, top and bottom, bring it together in the centre, which then has let it come forward a little bit more. Then welded it up very carefully, because now unfortunately it's going to have to go back to the chromas. And this is what happens when you don't trial fit stuff to start with. But had a bit of a nasty here, which was holding the end out as well, so I've tapped that back out, relieved the stress on that. So now, as you can see there, that bar's sitting on real good. I'm pretty happy the way that's gone on there now. So once that goes back to the chromas, unfortunately for the second time, it should be a real good bar. So it actually fits with no stress on it. Now the next thing I'm up to is this headlight bezel. I've got this issue here, as you can see. I pointed this out earlier. I've got to chop all this away now and replace that corner. And we've got an aftermarket guard here, and we've used a couple of bits off it. So I'll snip the corner out of the other one. I'll play with that until I get it really good how it sits on with my headlight bezel and everything. And then that'll be that cured, and then that front will be pretty well where it's going to be when the car's finished. Then I've got the little issue in the front of the battery tray, this little piece I've made up here. That now will allow me, once I move a couple of bits and pieces out of the way, to now tack that into its position on the front of that, into that skirt there under the battery tray. It goes down in the front here, don't know whether you can see it or not, but because I've got the rad support on where I need it, this will give me its correct position now. So I'll do that, then all the front comes back off, ready for a sandblast, and then we go for the final fit up. But you can see why we always do these trial fits. That's a classic example there of why you don't go ahead and paint the car and then try and fit stuff after it, because 9 times out of 10 it's going to have a few issues if you don't really know what the car's been. Sure, if you know what the car is and it's been prior to the strip down and it's all good, fine. But when you get something like this, it's a complete unknown. It's the really only way to go to have a good finish. But once that's done now, we'll put some lead in the corners of that, and that car will be really good. It'll sit nice and square and true again. So, in saying that, I'll move on now and I'll start to chop the corner of that guard off. Okay, so now I'll go into depth a little bit about the corner of this guard. So what's happened here, obviously back in the day when they've replaced this with the other bit of a mess that it was, they've just tacked all this in after they've chopped the old one out, and then they've body filled it all over. So now we've come down to fixing this properly. As you can see, we've replaced it with a good nose panel, and I've got the corner of the guard there where it's just had too much work. There's nothing left of the material. Tried to handle that a little bit with kid gloves to try and save it, but unfortunately, like a lot of the bits on this car, it's beyond it. So to do that properly now, what I'll do is I'll just assess that where I think is going to be the correct area to chop away. And the thing is, when you're doing these sort of repairs, you want to try and do the minimal to get the maximum effect. You don't want to overkill your repair because you make a lot of excess work and a lot of wasted time and not such a good repair. So what I'll do here now to get this really good in the end, and that's the result I want, is a nice finish. I'll check out the body line or the corner of that guard there just to see whether it's been pushed in or out, because it's been flogged a bit back there in its life. So what I'll do now is get right into this and have a good look and see just where everything's sitting. And once I decide which way to go, and all the time in my head I'm trying to remember, don't cut too much away. I want to have, as I say, minimum work for maximum effect in the end. So whether it's got to be chopped through there or chopped through here, I'll just come up with that solution as I go. But obviously I want to eliminate a lot of work if I can, but I want that effect. So we'll get into that, and that's the whole idea with any repair. In the end, before you even jump into it, you want to assess what you've got, and then if you're not sure, sit down and have a real good quiet think to yourself before you get into it, because you don't want to overdo the repair. You want to have a nice repair, as I say, with minimum effort. But to do it properly, I think this one here, after a good think about it, which I have had, is chop that bit away and go again. You'll see sometimes guys will get in, they'll add a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, but by the time you do all that, it's better off in a lot of instances to just take all that right away and go again. So especially in this one with the metal so thin, what I'll do is I'll chop that away and go again. But that's what you need to do when you're doing all sorts of repairs. Rust repairs, accident repairs, and the number one key to it all is assess what you've got. Have a good look before you jump in. Like back in the day when I used to do crash repairs, the first thing you would do is walk up to the car and visualise how that car had been hit. So you can visualise the way the impact damage has gone into that car, because the way it's gone in is the way it's gone out. So for instance, you get a car that's been hit, say, on the right hand front and pushed slightly to the left, you don't want to go pulling it straight forward, because the impact has gone on an almost an angle into the car and not straight into it. So what you want to do is pull that impact back out the way it come, and we always try to do it cold. And when I term cold is no heat. If it's got pressure on, when you're pulling something or trying to get it out, we try and have that pressure on and then tap all the steel and let it sit back and stretch back where it should. You've just got to know when enough is enough and when, you know, hold them and fold them. Basically, that's how it goes. So at the end of the day, that's what we like to do, and that's the whole point I'm making. Go back, assess what you've got before you jump in, because it can save yourself a lot of heartache, a lot of time and a lot of money. So that's what I've had to do with this whole front of this car. It's been very hard because it's had so many indiscretions, if you like. It's had a lot of butchery done to it. It's very hard to know just how much and where. Alrighty, so I've snipped a little corner out of that guard, and as you can see there, she's pretty crusty, not much left of it. So I'll come over here onto this aftermarket guard, and the reason you're probably wondering why we'd use this as a donor guard, well, simple as this. They're not what I call the absolute best of fits. I mean, worst come to worst, yeah, you could use it. You'd have to do a bit of mod here and there, or quite a bit, to make that, you know, look the goods on the car. So because we've got this old guard that we can still use, we've gone down that track. We'll just snip the little bits and pieces we need out of this aftermarket or non-genuine guard and just replace them onto that genuine one, which will give us a better finish in the end. So I've got my little piece here. We'll use it as a template. I'll just mark this out, a little piece I want to snip out of the corner here. So which way am I? Around that, where am I? There we go. So that's the little piece that I need, that corner. So I think that looks pretty good there. I'll just give that a bit of a mark. Like that. And then I'll snip that corner out of there. That's a little bit warm on the old fingers, that. Yeah, that is a bit warm. Let that cool down for a minute. But that's the plan. Get that to sit in there. I'll fiddle around with that. Oh, that is a bit bitey at the moment. Let that cool down. But yeah, I always try and cut things a bit prouder or a bit larger than they should be, because once you set it in, you want to trim bits and pieces down. You haven't cut yourself too short. Whereas that there, once I trim that, sit that in, that should tack in there fairly good. A bit of a dolly here and there, and that should pull into shape pretty well. But that is going to be a whole lot better than that ugly piece of nothing that's left there. And so thin as well, nothing left of it. But anyway, I'll trim this up and you can come back and have a look as I start to weld it in. Okay, so the other day there you seen me cut that little piece out, that non-genuine guard, so there it is. I've just sat it in, and that's where it's going to go right there. And a little tip, when you can't get into an awkward spot and you want something like this just to hold in its position, the old magnet, very handy. They're very strong little magnet, those, that'll hold that there for me while I give that a tack. But they're just a real convenient little way of doing it. So I'll give it a little zap here on the side, and then I'll have a bit of a look at what I've got and probably give it another one on the top. Then I'll take the guard off because it'll be in its right position that way, and then I can go around, give it a bit of a dolly where it needs it, weld it up, then pop it back on. But that'll cure that nasty little issue that it had on the end of the guard there. So we'll give this a tack. The old head's still a bit sore from where I got clocked. Putting that welding helmet on, that's biting a little bit there actually. That'll do, that's all I need for the minute. It's in position there. It's looking pretty good the way that's sitting. So I'll just pop the magnet off that I've got there and see how that's going to go. But that'll cure that nasty little corner that it had. But these little babies, they're very strong. They're very strong little magnets, those things. They really bite. That's going to be real nice there when it's finished up. All right. So I'll give it another tack here on the top and we'll continue on. Yeah, that's going to go in really well. So what I'll do now is I'll take the guard off. I'll give it a little dolly where it needs it, in around the back of it. Then I'll finish that little seam weld around, pop it back on and make sure I've got a good fit. But once that's on and it's all ground up and dressed up, that'll be real good because I'll lead over the top of that once it's back in, just to finish it off. But that's got rid of that ugly little corner. Happy days.
Well done, Pops, mate. Well done.
Mate, fluked another one. Righto, so I'll get into this now. I've got that where I want it. That ugly little bit of junk's gone. And now what I'm going to do is pull the front bar off. And I'm really happy now the way I've lined all the front of this up. I can actually move forward with the car now. I've had a few, probably about 2 weeks of on and off, fiddle around, getting gaps right, straightening bits and pieces. And you always have these at this stage of a repair. It kind of gets to, you progress along and then you'll have a moment where it almost drops into a hole for a couple of weeks when you get down to this. It's a bit of a brain fog thing because it becomes, well, not brain fog, but a bit brain numbing, because you're fiddling so much with fine gaps, you're trying to find what works, refining everything, and it takes a lot of concentration, and it's a weird thing. It seems to happen on every major build when it gets to this final fit up of all these bits and pieces to make sure the car's going to be really nice. And now I've just gone past that stage, and now I can actually, it's a good feeling, I can really now start to move forward with the car. So what I'll do now is, now that I've got all that out of the way, I can pull this back off, pull that guard off, do my little dress up there now, finish that, and then now I can go back to actually aligning my doors and start to get the front on the car. It's as I say, a good feeling. You're starting to progress forward with the job. Gone through that real phase of got to make it fit. It's really a fiddly time, and now it's good because you can actually get into it again. So that's what I'll do. I'll start to pull it all apart, get this bar off, and get this guard off and carry on from there. The old ratchet spanners, good things. Get these little bar end brackets off. And with this bar, when I went to fit it on, it was actually, it was scary. Honestly, that bar end, it sat out like out here, both sides. The stress on that bar was unbelievable. Now, the way I've done that, they'll just sit on there, bolt on, beautifully, no stress, and that's what you want. Once you've got to start to force things onto a car, that's a really bad thing, because in time, when that vehicle's used, it'll tend to want to creep and it'll go in all the bad directions. Your gaps will go a bit weird because the stress is constantly there kind of working on the car. So an ideal or a perfect repair is when everything fits up and sits on and there's no stress when everything bolts up, as this is at the moment. It's an absolutely brilliant, like that's got no stress, that just sits there. That's how you want that. And that's the whole plan, and that's why I've done what I've done, taken the time to make sure all this car fits up correctly. I mean, you can get on a car, you can force everything into shape, push it, bolt it up, but unfortunately you're only kidding yourself. It's not a good repair, but the way this one's done, it is an excellent repair. So now I'll take this front bar off. And I don't like to use a lot of air tools and stuff. I mean, yeah, they do have their place, but I don't like to overemphasise a lot of air ratchets and stuff, because you can tend to, well, cross-thread things. You jump in, you hit an air ratchet, and bang, before you know it, you've cross-threaded something. So I always like to do this part of it a little bit slowly to make sure everything's correct. Like these bar bracket bolts, for instance, to make them sit just where you want them, those bar brackets, little by little. You can do little things where you just tighten those bolts enough that'll make the bar sit there, and you can just give it a bump, maybe a mill this corner, mill the other, and that changes your whole perspective of what's going on. So that's why I say at this stage of the game, to set a car up correctly, that's what it takes to get a really, really top finish. And you know, that's just me, that's what I'm all about. I just like those really nice, correct fitting finished cars. What happens, unfortunately, I think it's a bit of a curse in a way for panel beaters if you're a bit onto it. You can't help but notice the imperfections in a car, especially a restored car. It becomes a bit of an inbuilt thing when you're doing it all the time. You just look for the faults. And there's nothing better when you look at a car and you run your eye over the way everything fits and sits on the car, and if you see how well it's all been done and correctly finished, it's a pretty good feeling, actually. You know someone's done it right. But yeah, I just, as I say, it's one of those things that it's a bit of an inbuilt thing when you've done it for so long. You can't help but not look for the faults. But that's just part of the course. So I'll get this bar off here now. I'll she comes, as easy as that. Now those brackets are aligned correctly, and that from evermore now that bar will just go back on, not a problem, will sit on. And where I've done the weld on the inside of that bar, once that's all chromed or nickel plated again, you'll never know that that's been touched. Unfortunately, the rest of it, it's not so good. There's not much I can do about that. That's had a little bit of abuse in the past, but nevertheless, that bar is a good fitting thing now. So just pop that over here out of the way. You've got right at the very ends here of the guard, the way they roll down, you'll see a bit of a difference between this one and this one. I think the Brisbane ones, that was the fold they had. It must have been the die they used, and that's a typical Brisbane assembled or made part, that one there, whereas this one obviously not. I think that might have been out of Adelaide, this one, I'm not sure by the look of it, but that's a real giveaway if you know what you're looking at. There's a complete different look there, the way that's done in the end of that fold. If Mick comes around with the camera there, you'll probably be able to really see the difference in that. You can actually see how that comes down and almost flattens out, if you like. And the other one's got a real high profile to it.
They'll also need to be fixed a bit too, Pops. That was bent.
Yeah, that'll have to dolly up. That'll be when I take this off and do all that. But you see the difference from that one to this one, completely different. That's got a real high profile, sits right up, and that is a genuine part. But we'll carry on here now, and I'll get this guard off. Just got a couple of clamps underneath here, holding it in place. Get those off out of the way. Now my Phillips screwdriver. What have I done? I've got bits everywhere at the moment. It's time for a massive clean up. Tend to get a bit carried away with the, once you get into the big repair side of it, you just get stuff laying around everywhere. It's like a cook in a kitchen. Before you know it, you've got stuff everywhere, up to your elbows in it. It's got that point now. For my own benefit, it's time to have a bit of a clean up, I think. But these self-tappers, they were just put in there to hold that guard in position while I got everything where I needed it to be. And another thing with this car, in underneath this little filler panel, these bolts, they were non-existent from the previous repair. They hadn't even bothered to put those back in. That's obviously not the bolt that will be used. It's just a dummy one for the time to line everything up. Once it's all put back together, it'll be all factory look once again. That's just to help me while I put this car together, basically. But yeah, I don't know what happened last time. It must have all been too hard. Didn't even bother to put bolts in either side, which is not a good thing, because that helps to align all your filler panel and your guard and everything. A bit long, that bolt's taking a bit to get it out, but anyway. Nearly there, that's it, there she comes. Right, now I'll get rid of these couple of self-tappers that I've got up the top here. Just positioning it. And you can have it, like when you do these jobs, you could have this guard on and off, God, dozens of times literally, to find to where everything has to fit, the positioning of everything, until you're really, really happy with what you got. And I'm a bit like that. I'm super fussy. I have to know it's right, and I'll trial fit until I make sure I know it's correct. What have I got there? Off she comes. Right, so now I can go to town on the end of that guard there, tap it up, weld it, get it back to where I need it to be. So that'll come up pretty good. And then when I get that done, I'll throw it back on, just make sure that that's going to be how I want it to be. And when I'm happy with that, Then I've got my little piece to put in the end of that skirt there behind the battery tray. But okay, I'll carry on here now and do some welding and doling, and Mick probably come back as I do it. All right, so you see me put that little piece on. What I like to do is, when you get stuff that's been really well and truly worked, like the top of that old guard there, you can see where it's been well and truly ground back in the day. Now, what I like to do, this is the way I go about welding, thicker to thinner steel. Little trick that I've found over the years is, when you go to weld, I get my wire to start the arc on the newer bit of steel because it's got a bit more meat. And then what I do is I try and blend that weld across into the thinner steel, because I found if you go the other way, naturally you've only got a little bit of meat there. If you strike the arc on that old stuff first, it's going to destroy it and blow it away. So kick the arc off on the good steel, blend it across onto the thin, and that way it just lets that pool go in without destroying what you're trying to do there. So little by little that one's going back in. We'll give it a little bit more here. Very thin it is, very thin there in a couple of spots, but I'll address that. Just making sure I've got enough meat on there when I grind that back. Not the prettiest at the moment, but it's got plenty of meat back on there. So now I'll give it a couple more just in that little hole there. I don't want to overdo the heat. A little bit more. Let's seam that corner in. Now I'll give this a bit more of a dolly just there, and I'll continue on with the welding. Just bring that little edge together there. That's pretty good. Nice little gap to run a bead in there. It'll blend back together quite nicely. Rightio. All right, so you can see there, you look in the back of that weld where I've put that little piece on that there. Looks like I say, not the prettiest weld from the other side, but it's completely penetrated well and truly. So I'll give that a quick clean up in the back of that, and that'll end up really good there. But the whole thing is key of penetration without too much heat. And when you're working with stuff, like I say, that's been ground down a little bit thin, it's hard because you've got to blend that thick to thin. And that's why I was saying, if you kick your arc off on the thick and blend it to the thin, and just enough, and that's the effect you'll get. That'll be really good and strong. So I'll turn that back over, and I'll finish that little weld across there, and then the little piece that I'm going to have to make up and put in here that was missing in action. Rightio. Righto. So try and get a little bit of a tack on that heavier bit of meat there. Little on there, a bit more, nice, going on good. A little bit more. Another one. Another one. And one more just to finish off that little run there. And that's it. Go from the old from the thick to the thin, and just continue that process, and that way you don't burn everything away. Now, by the time I dress all that up, that'll be really good. But I've got this little piece here to trim up, fill in. That's nothing, that's just incidental. I'll do that in a couple of minutes, but that's gone in good again now. Take care of that corner that was really completely worked to death. Bringing that edge down a little bit to match up there. I'll fill that in with a little bit of weld, and then I'll finish that with a little bit of steel through there just to blend that across into it. But to talking of hammers and things, as you do when you're doing these jobs and dollies. This particular one is a different shape to other ones. It's designed that way to get into like spots like there, for instance. And that's a Spear & Jackson. I don't know whether they're still made, I think they're Australian made, but that's what they call an 8-ounce hammer. And the way it's designed, and it's all different, all hammers for different jobs. But the swing, the drop of the hammer, especially, and you want to give it a little bit more, you've got that extra little bit of oomph behind it, where you come up with this, a pick hammer. That's a Sykes. They're a Pommy made or an English made hammer. That's probably, I think...
You can still see where it's made on there.
Okay.
Close.
Yep.
Yeah, made in England there, yeah.
Yeah. That hammer's probably about, gosh, that'd have to be 40 years old, that hammer. It's had a lot of work, and it's just a good thing. I think that's probably maybe the second handle in it, but I got to a stage where I just put some self-tappers in the head of them, whereas you see that one's had a proper wedge put in it and done properly, but after a while they come loose, and then the handles tend to split a little bit. So the way I've overcome that, a couple of stainless steel self-tappers in the end, spreads that out, and it'll go again for a long time. It saves changing the handle in it. But that's characteristic after a lot of hammer.
It really needs another handle.
It really does, but it still does the job. All right, that's got that buffed back a bit. We'll chuck her on the car, get rid of those earmuffs. We'll just see how this goes. So we'll set her on, see what we got. Hopefully that's going to sit on there pretty nicely. I think it should. Rightio.
Mate, you might have fluked one.
Oh mate, I'll tell you what, getting good at doing that fluke and those things. Just wants to sit on a little bit, just, there we go. That's better. Righto. Get a couple of self-tappers in here. The old self-tappers are really good to position stuff when you're just doing this, when you're doing your all your setups and fit-ups for these things, just to hold everything in place. Back in the day we used to use pop rivets. Sometimes we sort of still do, but there's other bits and pieces you can buy to do this as you go if you want to. But I don't know, the old self-tappers, I think to me work pretty good, because you know you can get them in and out pretty quick, and if you've got to change things, variation here and there, a mil or two, you can always do that. It's not an issue.
And the holes weld up easy.
Yeah, once you're finished, when it's all, you're doing your final fit up, and you just a couple of zaps with a MIG and they're filled in. But that at the moment, that's gone on there perfecto. Beautiful. And once we clean that up, well, this is spotted back into place, that guard and everything. That'll work out really well. We'll give that a nice skim there with some with a bit of lead. But that's cured that little corner really good.
Yeah, it looks good, eh?
Yep. So that little issue solved. So now I can move on to the other little corner over there. So anyway, that's good. I can carry on.
Okay, Pops. Well, that's it for this episode, mate. I think we're starting to get a little bit of progress there.
Yeah, we are definitely going in the right direction now.
It's starting to look really square in the front too. It looks the goods.
Yep. Starting to look like a Torana.
But hey, don't forget about SBI, Spray, Blast and Inspect. You can grab everything you need to build your dream car at home. So check out their website. I'll leave it in the description below. And What else you want to say, Pops?
No, you know what I always say, keep it real and keep it right, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.